Unemployment in Australia is now rising faster than the RBA expected, but employment is also rising. So today, I'm going to outline what this all means, what's actually happening in our economy, and what this all means for the property market going forwards. Let's dive in. Hello, it's Nero here. The unemployment rate rose to 4.1% in April, the Australian Bureau of Statistics said on Thursday, up from the revised higher figure of 3.9% in March. The figure was a little above expectations for a 3.9% outcome, and those expectations are as per what the Reserve Bank of Australia expected, and yet job creation was stronger than expected. I'll explain how we can have stronger job creation and stronger unemployment in a moment, but the big concern a lot of people will have is that as unemployment is rising, is that now bad news for the economy in total? Are property prices going to crash? What we have here is the Australian unemployment rate all the way back to 1978. And so what you can see here is that recently our unemployment rate's been sitting at 3.6, and now we're 4.1 as of April. Yet these unemployment rates are the lowest in history all the way back to 1978. We're nowhere near the average. In fact, when we look at unemployment from, say, 2009, we can see that it was sitting at around about 5.3%, 5% here, 5.8%. Until really the pandemic, we've been sitting at 5% or so. So we're still a full percentage of what could be considered the average unemployment rate in Australia. And meanwhile, what did property prices do during this time, sort of from about 2010 until 2019? They nearly doubled and more than doubled in many areas around the country. So when you see these clickbait headlines talking about how unemployment is increasing, you've got to put things into perspective. We're coming off the lowest unemployment rates in around about 50 years. Yes, unemployment will need to increase slightly, but we're well below average. It's different if unemployment was sitting at, say, 5.5% already, and then we were seeing unemployment increase. That would mean then that we're starting to go above the long-term average, and that could have a negative impact. But while we are sitting at these low unemployment rates of around about 4%, I do expect unemployment to increase to 4.5%, maybe 5%. That's just bringing us back to the long-term average. There's no real cause for concern here. Based on history and one other fact I'm about to outline, this increase in unemployment will not have a negative impact on property prices. Now, you might still be wondering, how can I say this? How can I say that more people losing their jobs won't have an impact on the property market? I mean, after all, aren't they mortgage holders? How will they pay their mortgages? Well, there's two things to consider here. First of all, when we look at the number of properties we're building in Australia, we currently have a national shortfall, according to this data, of 36%. That means we're not building enough properties for the number of people who need them. So therefore, even if someone can't afford their mortgage now because they've lost their jobs, when they sell in most areas around the country, there are more buyers than sellers. So on a macro level perspective, the median house price in Australia will continue to rise regardless of unemployment rising because of this supply and demand dynamic. But that doesn't mean that's going to be the case everywhere though. I'm talking at a macro level. On a micro level, in other words, looking at certain segments of the property market, certain areas will be affected. And these are the areas that are already in mortgage stress. Sydney suburbs with the most distressed property sales. Property owners in mortgage belt Sydney suburbs are feeling the financial strain and have the highest rates of distressed sales across the city. In the Blacktown area, distressed listings reached 13.2% of total property listings in April. Domain figures show a sharp rise from 8.7%. Distressed listings are high in the Parramatta region at 8.3%. In Sydney overall, 3.1% property listings were considered distressed last month, edging back though from 4.6% a year ago. So if you're looking to buy in Sydney, for example, you generally want to avoid some of these areas that I just mentioned where there's a higher than average distressed sales count. The same will apply to any market that you're looking to buy. even though the median price in that particular city might continue to rise, you will see that certain areas will struggle and certain areas will do really, really well. So don't freak out and say, oh, unemployment is rising, the whole property market is going to crash. The answer is a clear no to that. The supply shortages that we have right now, the fact that unemployment is coming off a near 50-year low, all of this points to property prices rising in general, but not everywhere. The next thing to consider is how employment is actually changing. So what we know is that from April last year to April this year, there was over 394,000 people who gained jobs. But the average time worked for people is 15 minutes lower per week. That's why we have this really unusual situation right now where unemployment is increasing, but employment is also increasing. And what we can see is that the number of jobs being advertised is still staying consistent, but it's just the number of people applying for jobs is going through the roof. It's because we've got more people coming into Australia than we have available jobs. Also, let me take you down memory lane for a second. You might remember just after the COVID pandemic, the government was pulling back a lot of its incentives like JobKeeper and JobSeeker. And at the time, again, many people said, property prices are now going to crash because people can't afford their mortgages. And I said something then that was very controversial. And although it probably seems unfair, it's still true to this day. And here it is. Unfortunately, many of the people losing their jobs, not everyone, but many of them, are not people who are currently looking to buy property. They're not people who currently have mortgages. That's unfortunately the state of the economy today. And so just like with JobSeeker and JobKeeper, when they were taken away, I said property prices would continue to rise. Despite so much criticism, what happened? Property prices did actually rise, and they continued to rise quite significantly. I expect something similar will happen again, because as unemployment starts to tick up, that will put downward pressure on wage price growth. This is the thing that the RBA has been most concerned about. They've been worried that they can't get wage price growth down fast enough. As long as wages continue to grow on average, it will keep inflation high. But if wage price growth starts to fall because unemployment is rising, that will mean then that people have less money to go and spend on things, and more importantly from our economic perspective, on services. That will then bring the cost of services down, finally bringing inflation down, leading to what I expect to be interest rates to fall sooner than many negative Nellies will tell you. Now, what does this then mean? Well, it then means that, remember, we have a massive supply shortage in terms of property. We now have interest rates about to be cut at some point. What does that mean? Well, then you have more people who still have jobs, because remember, unemployment is still at among the lowest it's been at for 50 years. So therefore, enough people have jobs. Enough people are in a position to be able to buy property when there isn't enough of it around. And this will force property prices higher on a macro level. The fact is, unemployment rising, it's not all doom and gloom. Yes, unfortunately, some people will be affected. But overall, I expect you will start to see interest rates start to fall. It's going to be good news for many mortgage holders. It'll be good news for many people who want to buy property, because their borrowing capacities will increase when interest rates fall. And with migration still being at record highs, regardless of what the federal government has said they're going to do, it's going to keep demand much, much higher than supply of properties, which means that property prices on average will continue to rise. But make sure you do your due diligence when buying.